Okay, let's say you have your prototype built, you've gotten some great customer feedback, and now you're ready to hand it off to engineering to do the build. Now is when you can really start working on some of the business side of things. There's a lot of different things you can do very early on to be proactive and get ready for what's next. One is getting incorporated. So you want to make sure that you're putting the right business structure to your company. And if you're a tech company who's going to need to raise capital, there's really only one option, and that's a Delaware C Corp. Most investors will not invest if you don't have a Delaware C Corp structure. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, tax implications and share limits and all those things. So you certainly can chat with an attorney. I think using an attorney early on is tricky, but valuable. I think they'll probably save you money in the long run, but they can also cost a lot up front. So it's a little bit of a difficult tightrope. Attorneys always want to overanalyze everything and overprotect and do whatever they can to sort of run up that attorney bill. But at the same time, if you do things wrong and have to clean them up later, that will end up costing even more. One of the things I did wrong was I filed a California LLC for my formation, which was completely ridiculous apparently, and nobody would have ever invested in that. So then much later, I had to file a Delaware C Corp, and then I filed that wrong too. Then I had to go back and change the shareholders, the number of shares, and all these things. So doing your research ahead of time to understand and talking with a lawyer if you can, what's the best incorporation, how many shares should I authorize, all of that. It's gonna ask you about a board and key partners. Now, if you're, a solo founder or a group of founders, you guys can be the board for, initially, but once you get into, later rounds of financing and you grow, then you'll actually need to establish a legitimate board of directors who's helping guide the company. But initial filings, it can be you, but you also want to be mindful about the number of shares. So the number of shares that you're authorizing, that's going to be the total pool of shares that you can issue out. So that could be to employees for like sweat equity, or they just get stock options for working for the company early or whatever that may be, or that shares that you would issue to investors as you start to raise capital. Now, it seems like the common trend is 10 million shares. So 10 million shares that, say you price it at 0.0001 per share. That seems to be kind of the common main starting point. Again, I didn't know that. I issued 100 shares for like $100 each, had to go back and file an amendment to have that changed. So 10 million shares used to be common. Now, my attorney, after I had done this, had told me, well, that's not usually what I recommend. I usually recommend like 5,000 shares, and there's tax implications and all these things. So it'd be good to chat with an attorney, be good to do some research or chat with a tax person, but it does seem sort of, if you're going to do this through, LegalZoom or Zen Business or one of those kind of do-it-yourself tools, or if you're just going to go to Delaware Direct, but that's tricky because you need a registered agent in Delaware. And if you're not in Delaware, you're going to need an address and all that. So if you use like one of the incorporation websites, then they can be your registered agent in that state. So you can just go on there, complete the paperwork, file it. Now, I did that as well. I use Zen Business. I had some serious challenges every time I've done a transaction with them, but at the end of the day, it did work, and it probably did save quite a bit in attorney fees. So do what works for you. It's good to at least have an early conversation with an attorney about what you're thinking, just to avoid any pitfalls. But let's say you incorporate Delaware C Corp, 10 million authorized shares. Now, 10 million authorized shares. This gets very confusing to me, so try to stay with me here. That's just the total amount that you can issue. That doesn't mean any of them are issued. So that means you have a pool of 10 million shares that you can do something or another with at some point in time. You being founders, whoever the founding team is, it's likely you may want to issue your shares and just say, well, we've earned our shares, we're the founders, we're issuing them. Makes sense. But you have to save enough shares as room if you're going to bring on investors. So you want to be really mindful about how much of the company you're issuing and how much you're leaving for potential fundraising for investors later. We'll talk about fundraising a little bit more, but the whole issued shares versus authorized shares took me through a bit of a loop. So authorized means that's how many you created in the state of Delaware. That's how many are available for you to issue, but you actually have to physically issue those shares for somebody to own that stock.